The patrol car's siren screamed through the quiet streets of Willow Creek, Tennessee, slicing the summer night like a knife. David Carter, hands cuffed behind his back, felt the cold metal bite into his wrists as the officer shoved him against the hood. His heart pounded not for himself, but for the boy watching from the porch, eyes wide with fear. David had always known love could be a battlefield, but he never imagined it would land him here, arrested for resisting an officer who'd spat slurs at him and his partner, Michael, in their own front yard. The accusation was a lie, twisted from a heated moment when David had dared to stand his ground. Now, as the cop barked orders, David's gaze locked on his adopted son, Eli, standing frozen under the porch light. At 16, Eli was all sharp edges and quiet strength. But tonight, his face betrayed a terror David hadn't seen since the day they'd brought him home from foster care. Willow Creek was a town of whispers and sideways glances, where David and Michael's life together as a married couple had always stirred unease among some neighbors. They'd built a home here anyway, carving out a sanctuary for Eli, who'd spent years bouncing between foster homes before they adopted him. David, a high school art teacher with a gentle smile, and Michael, a nurse with a laugh that could light up a room, had fought for their family. But tonight, a single call from a neighbor, someone who'd never accepted their kind, living next door, had spiraled into this nightmare. "Get in the car, fag," the officer, a burly man named Hargrove, snarled, loud enough for Eli to hear. David's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "Don't talk to my son like that." Hargrove's eyes narrowed, and he yanked David harder, slamming the car door shut. As the cruiser pulled away, David caught one last glimpse of Eli, now running toward Michael, who'd just arrived home from a late shift. The police station was a blur of fluorescent lights and sharp voices. David sat in a holding cell, his mind racing. Hargrove's report claimed David had shoved him during an argument, a charge that could cost him his teaching license, his reputation, and maybe even his family. The truth was simpler. Hargrove had shown up after a noise complaint, seen David and Michael holding hands on their porch, and lost it. He'd called them names, demanded they keep it indoors, and when David calmly refused to back down, Hargrove had escalated things. Now, David was the one in cuffs. Hours later, Michael arrived at the station, his face pale but resolute. "We're getting you out," he said through the bars, his voice trembling with anger and love. "Eli told me everything. He saw it all." David's chest tightened. Eli had been through too much already: abandonment, rejection, the scars of a system that hadn't known how to care for a kid like him. The thought of his son witnessing this injustice, of carrying that weight, broke David's heart. By morning, the news had spread. Willow Creek's small but vocal conservative faction was already spinning the story. David Carter, the gay teacher, was a danger to the community. Online forums buzzed with half-truths, painting him as aggressive, unstable. But there was another side to the town, one that had quietly supported David and Michael over the years: students who loved David's art classes, colleagues who respected his kindness, and a few neighbors who'd grown to see them as family. They began to rally, organizing a small protest outside the courthouse where David's hearing was set. The hearing was scheduled for a week later, and the days leading up to it were a storm of emotion. Michael spent hours with their lawyer, Sarah, a fierce advocate who'd taken their case pro bono. She warned them the charge of resisting arrest could stick unless they had hard evidence to counter Hargrove's story. Eli's testimony could be key, she said, her voice steady but cautious. He's a minor. But he was there. If he's willing to speak, it could change everything. David hated the idea of Eli in a courtroom, reliving the night's trauma. But Eli, sitting at their kitchen table with a sketchbook he'd barely touched since the arrest, looked up with a fire in his eyes. I want to do it, he said. They can't lie about you, Dad. Not like this. David's throat tightened. He'd spent years teaching Eli to trust again, to believe in love and justice. Now, his son was ready to fight for him. The courthouse was a gray, imposing building, its steps crowded with supporters and detractors. David walked in, flanked by Michael and Sarah, feeling the weight of every stare. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Hargrove sat across the room, his face smug, his uniform crisp. The prosecutor laid out the case. David had assaulted an officer, resisted arrest, and posed a threat. The words felt like punches, each one landing harder than the last. Then Sarah called Eli to the stand. The room fell silent as the boy walked forward, his shoulders squared but his hands trembling. David's heart Aketa wanted to shield Eli from this, to take his place. But Eli's voice, when he spoke, was clear and strong. My dad didn't do anything wrong, he began, his eyes locked on the judge. That cop, Hargrove, he came to our house because someone complained about us. Not about noise, about who we are. Eli's words cut through the room like a blade. He described the night in vivid detail, Hargrove's slurs, his aggression, the way he twisted David's arm when David asked him to leave. My dad was protecting us, Eli said, his voice breaking. He's always protected me. And now they're trying to take him away. The courtroom was still, every word landing with weight. David saw tears in Michael's eyes, felt his own vision blur. The judge, a stern woman with gray hair, leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Sarah pressed forward, presenting neighbors' statements and a grainy Ring camera video that partially corroborated Eli's story. But it was Eli's testimony, raw, honest, unflinching, that shifted the room. Even Hargrove's smugness faltered. The judge called a recess, and David reached for Michael's hand, their fingers intertwining. He's so brave, David whispered. Michael nodded, unable to speak. The recess stretched on, and whispers filled the courthouse halls. Supporters outside chanted David's name, their voices carrying through the walls. David thought of the life he and Michael had built, the love they'd fought for, the family they'd created against all odds. He thought of Eli, who'd once been too scared to speak, now standing up for truth. Whatever happened next, David knew one thing: they were stronger than the hate that had tried to break them. As the judge returned, the room held its breath. David squeezed Michael's hand, his heart pounding. Eli sat in the gallery, his sketchbook clutched to his chest, his eyes fixed on his father. The truth was out, but would it be enough? The judge's gavel struck, and the courtroom snapped back to attention. David's pulse raced as he sat beside Michael, their hands still clasped under the table. Eli's testimony had left a mark. David could see it in the way the judge's eyes lingered on his son, in the murmurs rippling through the gallery. But the prosecution wasn't done. They called Hargrove to the stand, and the officer strode forward with a confidence that made David's stomach churn. Hargrove's story was polished, rehearsed. He claimed David had been belligerent, shouting obscenities and shoving him when he tried to issue a warning about the noise complaint. "I was just doing my job," Hargrove said, his voice steady, his eyes avoiding Eli. Carter escalated things. "I had no choice but to restrain him." The prosecutor nodded, presenting Hargrove's body cam footage, conveniently edited to show only David's raised voice, not the slurs or aggression that had sparked it. Sarah, their lawyer, was ready. She cross-examined Hargrove with precision, her questions sharp and unrelenting. "Officer, did you use any derogatory language toward Mr. Carter or his husband?" Hargrove's jaw tightened, but he shook his head. "No, ma'am." Sarah pressed further, pointing out inconsistencies in his report and the lack of audio in parts of the footage. Hargrove's composure slipped, his answers growing curt. David watched, hope flickering but tempered by fear. Small towns like Willow Creek often protected their own, and Hargrove was one of their own. Back at home that evening, the weight of the day pressed down on the family. Eli sat cross-legged on the living room floor, sketching furiously, his pencil scratching against the paper. David recognized the intensity Eli drew when words failed him, a habit he'd picked up in foster care. Michael cooked dinner, the clatter of pots a quiet rebellion against the chaos. "He did so well today," Michael said, stirring a pot of chili. "Eli was incredible." David nodded, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying Hargrove's lies, the prosecutor's smugness. The community's divide grew sharper. A local church group circulated a petition to have David removed from his teaching job, claiming he was a negative influence. But the high school's art club, led by a fierce senior named Maya, fought back. They organized a social media campaign, Justice for Mr. Carter, sharing stories of David's kindness, how he'd stayed late to help struggling students, how he'd turned the art room into a safe space for kids like Eli. Posts flooded in, some from former students now in college, others from parents who'd seen David's impact. The support was a lifeline, but the hate mail piling up in their mailbox reminded David how high the stakes were. Sarah called with an update. The judge had requested more evidence, including any additional footage from neighbors' cameras. David and Michael spent the next day canvassing their street, knocking on doors. Most were sympathetic but hesitant, wary of getting involved. One neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, a widow who'd always waved at them, handed over a USB drive. "My security camera caught something," she said quietly. "I don't know if it helps, but you're good people." David's throat tightened as he thanked her, hope sparking again. The footage was grainy but damning. It showed Hargrove's cruiser pulling up, his aggressive stance as he approached David and Michael on their porch. The audio was faint, but Hargrove's slurs were unmistakable, as was David's calm response. It wasn't perfect, but it backed Eli's testimony and exposed Hargrove's lies. Sarah was ecstatic. "This could turn the case," she said. "But we need to be ready. The prosecution will fight dirty." The next hearing was electric with tension. Sarah presented the new footage, and the courtroom buzzed as Hargrove's voice echoed through the speakers, his hateful words laid bare. The judge's face hardened, and Hargrove shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The prosecution scrambled, arguing the footage was inconclusive, But the damage was done. David glanced at Eli, who sat with Maya and a few other students, their faces lit with cautious hope. Outside, the crowd had grown. Supporters now outnumbered the detractors, their signs proclaiming love wins and truth matters. David felt a surge of gratitude for this scrappy, imperfect town that was starting to show its heart. But the fight wasn't over. The prosecution called a surprise witness, a neighbor who claimed David had a history of causing trouble. David's heart sank. He recognized the name Tom Grayson, a man who'd never hidden his disdain for their family. Grayson's testimony was a barrage of half-truths, painting David as confrontational, a man who flaunted his lifestyle. Sarah dismantled his claims, pointing out his lack of evidence and his own history of complaints against other neighbors. But the smear lingered, and David felt the weight of every eye in the room. Michael squeezed his hand, whispering, "We're still here. We're still us." That night, Eli showed David his sketch, a drawing of their family, standing together against a stormy sky, their faces fierce and unbroken. "This is us," Eli said, his voice steady. "No matter what they say." David pulled him into a hug, tears burning his eyes. He'd spent years teaching Eli to believe in himself. But now, Eli was teaching him what courage looked like. The trial stretched on, each day a battle of words and wills. Sarah worked tirelessly, digging up more witnesses, colleagues, students, even a former foster care worker who'd known Eli. Each added a piece to the puzzle, showing David as a man of integrity, a father who'd fought for his son. But the prosecution's narrative held sway with some, and the judge remained unreadable. David began to wonder if the truth would be enough, or if fear and prejudice would win out. As the final hearing loomed, David and Michael sat with Eli on their porch, the same spot where this nightmare had begun. The stars were bright above Willow Creek, and for a moment, the world felt still. "Whatever happens," David said, his voice thick, "I'm proud of you, Eli. And I'm proud of us." Eli nodded, his hand resting on his sketchbook. Michael leaned against David, their shoulders touching, a silent promise to face whatever came next together. The morning of the final hearing dawned gray and heavy, the air thick with the promise of rain. David woke early, his body tense, his mind replaying every moment of the trial. Today would decide everything: his freedom, his job, the life they'd built. Michael was already up, making coffee, his movements deliberate, as if grounding himself in routine. Eli sat at the kitchen table, sketching again, his pencil tracing the outline of a courthouse under a stormy sky. "You ready for today?" David asked, sitting beside him. Eli didn't look up, but his nod was firm. "I'm not letting them win," he said, his voice low but fierce. David's heart swelled. Eli had grown so much, from the quiet, guarded boy they'd met to this young man who refused to back down. Michael set a mug in front of David, his hand lingering on his shoulder. "We've got this," he said, and David clung to the certainty in his voice. The courthouse was packed, the air buzzing with anticipation. Supporters lined the steps, their signs now joined by rainbow flags, a quiet defiance against the gray sky. Inside, the gallery was a sea of familiar faces: Maya and the art club, Mrs. Thompson, colleagues from the high school. But there were others, too. Faces David didn't know. People who'd heard about the case and come to stand with them. The sight bolstered him, a reminder that love could build bridges even in a divided town. The prosecution opened with a final push, doubling down on Hargrove's story. They painted David as a man who'd lost control, a threat to order. The prosecutor's voice dripped with condescension as he questioned why a man like David would provoke an officer. Sarah countered fiercely, her closing argument a masterclass in clarity. She replayed the neighbor's footage, highlighted Eli's testimony, and called out Hargrove's prejudice. "This isn't about resisting arrest," she said, her voice ringing through the courtroom. "It's about a man targeted for who he loves." Then it was David's turn to speak. He stood, his knees shaky but his resolve firm. "I've spent my life teaching kids to be kind, to be brave," he began, his voice steadying. "I've tried to live that way, too. For my husband, for my son. I didn't fight that night to cause trouble. I fought to protect my family." He looked at Eli, who gave a small nod, and David felt a surge of strength. "I believe in this town, in its heart. I believe the truth matters." The judge called another recess, and the waiting was agony. David, Michael, and Eli sat in a small room off the courtroom, the silence heavy. Eli clutched his sketchbook, flipping through pages of drawings, some of their family, others of Willow Creek, its beauty and its flaws captured in sharp lines. "I drew this for you," he said, showing David a sketch of the three of them, hands linked, standing tall. David's eyes stung. "It's perfect," he whispered. Outside, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the courthouse windows. The crowd didn't disperse, their signs sagging but their voices strong. Maya led a chant, her voice carrying over the rain, "Justice for David." David heard it from inside, and for the first time in days, he let himself believe they might win. When the judge returned, the room fell silent. Her face was still unreadable, but her voice was clear. "After reviewing the evidence, including the testimony of Eli Carter and the submitted footage, I find significant inconsistencies in Officer Hargrove's account." David's breath caught. "The charge of resisting arrest is dismissed. Mr. Carter, you are free to go." The courtroom erupted cheers from their supporters, gasps from others. Michael pulled David into a hug, tears streaming down his face. Eli ran to them, and the three of them held each other, the weight of the past weeks lifting. But the victory wasn't clean. Hargrove faced no immediate consequences, though Sarah promised to push for an investigation. The school board, under pressure from the community, reinstated David's teaching position, but whispers of prejudice lingered. Some parents vowed to pull their kids from his classes, while others sent emails of support, promising to enroll their children in his art program. That night, the family sat on their porch, the rain now a gentle drizzle. Eli leaned against David, his sketchbook open to the drawing of their family. "You were right," Eli said softly. "The truth does matter." David kissed his forehead, then reached for Michael's hand. They'd won, but the fight had left scars on Eli, on their marriage, on their trust in the world. The next day, David returned to school, greeted by a hallway lined with student artwork, much of it inspired by the trial. Maya had organized a mural project, a vibrant tribute to love and resilience, with Eli's sketches at its heart. David stood before it, overwhelmed, as students gathered around, their chatter filling the air. He saw Eli among them, laughing with Maya, his shoulders lighter than they'd been in weeks. But the story wasn't over. Willow Creek was changing. Slowly. Imperfectly. The church group's petition fizzled out. And Mrs. Thompson started a neighborhood watch to promote inclusivity. David and Michael began hosting community dinners, inviting supporters and skeptics alike, determined to rebuild trust. Eli, inspired by the trial, started a school club for kids in foster care, a space to share their stories through art. As weeks turned to months, the family found a new rhythm. David's art classes grew, filled with kids who saw him not as a scandal, but as a hero. Michael took on a leadership role at the hospital, advocating for better training on bias. And Eli kept drawing, his sketchbook a testament to their journey, each page a step toward healing. One evening, as they sat together, Eli handed David a new drawing, the courthouse, but this time under a clear sky, with their family standing in front, hands linked. "This is us now," Eli said, his voice steady. David looked at it, then at his son, his husband, and felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. They'd faced the storm and come out stronger. And in that strength, they'd found something unbreakable. The weeks after the trial were a strange mix of triumph and unease. David walked through Willow Creek with his head high, but he felt the lingering stares, the hushed conversations that stopped when he passed. The dismissal of the charges had cleared his name, but it hadn't erased the divide in the town. Some saw him as a symbol of resistance. Others, a reminder of what they'd rather forget. At home, the family tried to reclaim normalcy. Michael threw himself into work, taking extra shifts to keep his mind busy. Eli spent hours in the garage, turning it into an art studio, his sketches covering every wall. David returned to teaching, but each class felt like a balancing act. Some students were more engaged than ever, while others watched him warily, their parents' biases reflected in their eyes. One afternoon, Maya stopped by with a proposal. "We want to take the mural to the town square," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "Make it permanent. Show everyone what we stand for." David hesitated. The mural, with its bold colors and Eli's sketches, was a powerful statement, but it would also reignite tensions. Michael, overhearing, nodded. "Do it," he said. "Let's show them we're not going anywhere." The town council meeting to approve the mural was a battleground. Supporters packed the room, their voices loud and passionate. But a vocal minority led by Tom Grayson pushed back. "This is about family values," Grayson argued, his face red. "We don't need this in our town." Maya stood up, her voice steady. "This is about our values: love, truth, community. Mr. Carter's family is part of that." Eli, sitting beside David, squeezed his hand, and David felt a surge of pride. The council voted narrowly to approve the mural, and the next weekend, the town square buzzed with activity. Students, neighbors, even strangers from nearby towns came to help paint. Eli worked alongside Maya, his sketches coming to life in vibrant hues. David watched, his chest tight with emotion, as the mural took shoppy celebration of resilience, with their family's story woven into every stroke. But not everyone was pleased. Late one night, David woke to the sound of glass shattering. He and Michael rushed outside to find their mailbox spray-painted with slurs. The word fag scrawled in angry red letters. Eli stood frozen on the porch, his face pale. David's first instinct was to shield him. But Eli shook his head. "I'm not scared," he said, though his voice trembled. "They're just loud. We're louder." The vandalism made headlines, and the community's response was swift. Mrs. Thompson organized a cleanup, and by morning, neighbors had repainted the mailbox with rainbow colors, leaving notes of support taped to it. The high school's art club launched a new campaign, Willow Creek for All, and businesses in town began displaying rainbow stickers in their windows. David felt a shift. Subtle but real, the town was starting to choose sides, and love was gaining ground. Still, the incident left its mark. Eli grew quieter, his sketches darker, filled with jagged lines and stormy skies. David worried, but Michael reminded him. "He's processing. Give him time." One evening, Eli showed them a new drawing, the vandalized mailbox, but surrounded by hands holding paintbrushes, transforming it into something beautiful. "This is what we do," Eli said. "We fix things." David hugged him, marveling at his son's resilience. At school, David noticed a change. More students joined his classes, drawn by the mural and the media coverage. One girl, shy and hesitant, approached him after class. "My brother's gay," she whispered. "He's scared to tell anyone." "You make it feel possible." David's throat tightened. He'd always taught art as a way to express truth, but now he saw its power to change lives. The family began to heal, piece by piece. Michael started a support group at the hospital for LGBTQ+ families, a space to share stories and find strength. David and Eli collaborated on a new art project, a series of portraits celebrating Willow Creek's unsung heroes. Mrs. Thompson, Maya, the foster care worker who'd helped them find Eli. The portraits were displayed at the community center, drawing crowds and sparking conversations. One night, as they sat around the dinner table, Eli spoke up. "I want to study law," he said, his voice firm. "Like Sarah, I want to help people like us." David and Michael exchanged a glance, pride swelling in their chests. Eli had always been their fighter, but now he had a path, a purpose born from their shared struggle. The mural in the town square became a landmark, a symbol of Willow Creek's slow, messy journey toward acceptance. Tourists stopped to take pictures, and local news ran stories about the town's transformation. David felt a quiet hope, tempered by realism. Change was hard-won, and there would always be those who resisted. But every time he passed the mural, saw Eli's sketches woven into its heart, he knew they'd made a difference. As spring turned to summer, the family planned a trip break from Willow Creek, a chance to breathe. They chose San Francisco, a city where they could walk hand in hand without fear. Eli, now 17, was excited, sketching ideas for their adventure. David watched him, marveling at how far they'd come. The trial had tested them, but it had also shown them their strength. On their last night in Willow Creek before the trip, they sat on the porch, the air warm and fragrant with blooming jasmine. Eli flipped through his sketchbook, showing them a new drawing, their family, standing under a rainbow, the courthouse a distant speck. "This is our story," he said, his voice steady. David pulled him close, Michael's arm around them both. They'd faced hate and fear, but they'd also found love and courage. And that, David knew, was a victory worth fighting for. San Francisco was a revelation. The city pulsed with life, its streets a kaleidoscope of colors and voices. David, Michael, and Eli wandered through the Castro, where rainbow flags fluttered from every corner, a stark contrast to Willow Creek's tentative acceptance. Eli's eyes lit up at the murals, the street art, the unapologetic joy of a place that celebrated who they were. David felt a weight lift, seeing his son so free, his sketchbook filling with vibrant new drawings. They spent days exploring Golden Gate Park, the waterfront, hole-in-the-wall cafes where they laughed over coffee and pastries. Michael held David's hand openly, something they rarely did back home. And Eli teased them, his grin wide. One evening, they attended a drag show, and Eli cheered louder than anyone, his laughter echoing through the crowd. David watched, his heart full, knowing these moments were stitching up the wounds left by the trial. But even in San Francisco, the past wasn't far behind. David got a call from Sarah, their lawyer, during their trip. "Hargrove's been suspended," she said, her voice triumphant. The footage and Eli's testimony sparked an internal review. They're investigating his conduct. David exhaled, relief mingling with caution. It was a step, but not enough. He thanked Sarah, then shared the news with Michael and Eli. Eli's face hardened. "Good," he said. "But he shouldn't be a cop at all." Back in Willow Creek, the family returned to a town that felt different, if only slightly. The mural in the town square had become a touchstone, drawing visitors and locals alike. Maya and the art club had started a mentorship program, pairing high school students with younger kids to create art that told their stories. Eli jumped in, teaching a group of middle schoolers how to sketch their dreams. David watched him, marveling at how his son turned pain into purpose. The school year brought new challenges. Some parents still pulled their kids from David's classes, but others enrolled theirs, inspired by the mural and the Willow Creek for All campaign. David leaned into his teaching, using art to spark conversations about identity and resilience. One day, a student left a note on his desk, "Thank you for being you. It helps me be me." David tucked it into his wallet, a quiet reminder of why he kept going. Michael's support group grew, too, drawing families from neighboring towns. At one meeting, a young couple shared their fear of coming out, and Michael listened, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to do it alone," he said, glancing at David, who nodded. They were building something to community, a network of support that hadn't existed before. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Eli's decision to pursue law took root. He started shadowing Sarah, learning the ins and outs of legal work. She was impressed, calling him a natural. "He's got fire," she told David and Michael. "And he's got heart." Eli spent evenings researching scholarships, determined to attend a college with a strong pre-law program. David and Michael helped, poring over applications, their pride in Eli a constant light. But the scars of the trial lingered. One night, David found Eli awake at 2 a.m., staring at his sketchbook. "I keep seeing that night," Eli admitted, his voice small. "The cop. The cuffs. You being taken away." David sat beside him, his hand on Eli's shoulder. "I'm here now," he said. "And you saved me. You were so brave." Eli nodded, but his eyes were distant. David knew healing wasn't linear, it would take time. The community continued to shift. Mrs. Thompson's neighborhood watch grew, hosting block parties that brought together families who'd once kept their distance. At one, Tom Grayson showed up, his face guarded. David braced himself, but Grayson only nodded, offering a quiet, "Nice mural." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. David nodded back, choosing peace over confrontation. The high school hosted an art exhibition, showcasing Eli's work alongside other students. His sketches told their family's story at trial. The mural, the trip to San Francisco. The gallery was packed, and David saw tears in people's eyes as they studied Eli's art. One drawing stood out, their family, standing under a tree, its branches heavy with leaves shaped like hearts. "This is home," Eli had written beneath it. As fall deepened, David and Michael began planning their next community dinner. They invited everyone's supporters, skeptics, even Grayson. The table was crowded, the air filled with laughter and debate. Eli sat at the head, his sketchbook open, drawing the scene as it unfolded. David watched him, then looked at Michael, their hands brushing under the table. They'd fought for this moment, for this messy, beautiful life. One evening, Eli came home with news. "I got into Vanderbilt," he said, holding up an acceptance letter. David and Michael hooped, pulling him into a hug. Vanderbilt's pre-law program was competitive, and Eli's scholarship covered nearly everything. "You're going to change the world," Michael said, his voice thick. Eli grinned, but his eyes were serious. "I just want to make it fairer," he said. The family stood on their porch that night, the stars bright above Willow Creek. Eli held his sketchbook, showing them a new drawing, a courtroom, but this time with him at the stand, speaking for others. David felt a lump in his throat. They'd faced hate, fear, and lies, but they'd also found strength, love, and a community that was learning to listen. And in Eli, they saw a future brighter than they'd ever dared hope. Winter settled over Willow Creek, blanketing the town in quiet snow. The mural in the town square stood vibrant against the gray, a beacon of color that drew eyes even on the coldest days. David walked past it daily, his breath fogging in the air, a mix of pride and disbelief at how far they'd come. The trial felt like a lifetime ago, but its echoes lingered in small ways, a glance from a neighbor, a hesitation in a parent's voice at school meetings. Eli threw himself into his final year of high school, balancing classes, the art club, and his work with Sarah. He'd started interning at her law office, filing papers and sitting in on client meetings. "I want to understand how it works," he told David one night, his laptop open to a case study. "How to fight for people like you did for us." David smiled, but his heart ached. Eli was growing up, carrying their family's fight into the world. Michael's support group had become a lifeline for many. At one meeting, a teenager named Sam shared his story of being kicked out by his parents for being trans. Michael arranged for Sam to stay with a foster family, and David offered him a spot in the art club. Eli took Sam under his wing, showing him how to channel pain into sketches. "You're not alone," Eli told him, and David saw the same fire in his son that had carried them through the trial. The school board, wary of more controversy, kept a close eye on David. He felt it in the extra evaluations, the pointed questions about his curriculum. But his students were his shield kids like Maya and Sam, who turned the art room into a sanctuary. One day, a quiet boy named Lucas approached David with a painting of two hands clasped, one with a rainbow bracelet. "It's for you," Lucas said, shyly. "For everything." David hung it above his desk, a quiet rebellion against the scrutiny. The community dinners grew, spilling onto the porch as spring approached. Mrs. Thompson brought her famous peach cobbler, and even Tom Grayson started showing up regularly, his demeanor softening. At one dinner, he pulled David aside. "I was wrong," he said, his voice gruff. "Didn't see you for who you are." It wasn't a full apology, but David took it, nodding. "Takes guts to say that," he replied. Grayson looked away, but a weight seemed to lift. Eli's sketches evolved, reflecting the town's slow change. He drew the community dinners, the mural, Sam's tentative smile as he painted with the art club. One evening, he showed David and Michael a new piece, Willow Creek's town square, but with people of all kinds sold. Young, queer, straight, standing together. "This is what I want," Eli said. "A place where everyone fits." David's eyes stung. His son was dreaming bigger than he ever had. Sarah called with more news. Hargrove had been fired after the investigation uncovered a pattern of misconduct. The news spread quickly, and Willow Creek buzzed with reactions. Some decried it as unfair. Others saw it as justice long overdue. David and Michael celebrated quietly, raising glasses of wine on their porch. "To truth," Michael said, and David echoed. To Eli, their son, sketching nearby, looked up and grinned. The high school spring art show was a triumph. Eli's work took center stage. A series called Roots and Wings that told their family's story alongside others in Willow Creek. Sam's paintings hung beside his, raw and powerful. The gallery was packed, and David saw faces he hadn't expected, parents who'd once opposed him, now nodding thoughtfully at the art. The principal pulled David aside, her tone softer than usual. "You're doing good work here," she said. "Keep it up." As graduation loomed, Eli prepared for Vanderbilt. He and David spent evenings sorting through old sketches, laughing over memories. One drawing stopped David cold, a younger Eli. Alone, his face shadowed. "That was me before you," Eli said quietly. "I don't draw like that anymore." David pulled him into a hug, unable to speak. He'd fought for Eli's future, but Eli had fought for theirs, too. The community rallied to send Eli off. Maya organized a farewell party in the town square. Under the mural, neighbors brought food, music played, and kids ran around with sparklers. Eli stood with Sam, explaining a sketch to him, their heads bent close. David watched, his arm around Michael, feeling the warmth of a town that was learning to embrace them. On Eli's last night in Willow Creek, the family sat on the porch, the air thick with summer's end. Eli showed them his final sketch, their family, standing under a vast sky, with Willow Creek's skyline in the distance. "This is where I started," he said, "and I'm taking it with me." David's heart swelled. They'd faced hate and won, not just in court, but in the slow, messy work of changing hearts. As Eli packed his bags, David slipped a note into his sketchbook. "You're our hero. Always." Michael added a photo of the three of them, laughing in San Francisco. They drove Eli to the airport, the car filled with quiet anticipation. At the gate, Eli hugged them both, his grip fierce. "I'll make you proud," he whispered. David smiled, tears in his eyes. "You already have." Eli's departure left a quiet ache in the house. David and Michael wandered through their routines, the absence of Eli's laughter and the scratch of his pencil noticeable in every corner. They texted him daily, smiling at his updates about Vanderbilt new friends, late-night study sessions, a professor who'd praised his passion for justice. But Willow Creek felt different without him, like a canvas missing its boldest stroke. David threw himself into teaching, channeling his energy into his students. The art room became a hub for kids like Sam, who'd started opening up through his paintings. David noticed how Sam mirrored Eli in small ways, the way he held his brush, the intensity in his eyes when he worked. One day, Sam showed David a painting of a door half open, light spilling through. "It's about hope," Sam said, and David nodded, seeing Eli's influence in every line. Michael's support group grew stronger, now meeting twice a month. Families came from across the county, drawn by word of mouth. At one session, a mother shared her struggle to accept her lesbian daughter. Michael listened, then spoke about his and David's journey, the trial, and Eli's courage. "Love takes work," he said, his voice steady. "But it's worth it." The mother nodded, tears in her eyes, and David felt a quiet pride in his husband's strength. The mural in the town square became a point of pride for Willow Creek. Tourists posed in front of it, and local businesses sold postcards of Eli's sketches. But not everyone was won over. A new petition circulated, calling for the mural's removal, claiming it promoted division. David and Michael attended the council meeting, bracing for another fight. Maya spoke first, her voice fierce. "This mural is our story, all of us. You don't get to erase that." The council voted to keep it, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Life settled into a new rhythm. David and Michael hosted community dinners every month, each one more crowded than the last. Mrs. Thompson became a regular, bringing her cobbler and stories of Willow Creek's past. Even Tom Grayson attended, his presence less tense each time. One night, he helped clear dishes, a small gesture that felt like progress. David caught his eye and smiled, and Grayson nodded back, a silent truce. Eli came home for Thanksgiving, his energy filling the house. He talked nonstop about Vanderbilt, his classes, and a new project, a legal clinic for underserved communities. "I want to do what Sarah did for us," he said, his eyes bright. David and Michael listened, marveling at how their son had grown into this fierce, compassionate young man. After dinner, Eli showed them a new sketch, a courtroom filled with people like Sam, each holding a brush or a book, fighting for their place. The holiday brought the community together. The town square hosted a winter festival, the mural glowing under string lights. Sam performed a spoken-word piece about his journey, his voice steady as the crowd listened. Rapt, David stood with Michael, their hands entwined, watching their town embrace the kids they'd fought for. Maya, now a senior, announced she'd been accepted to an art school, inspired by David's teaching. "You showed me what's possible," she told him. and David's heart swelled. But challenges remained. A new principal at the high school, wary of controversy, suggested David tone down the activism in his classes. David refused, calmly but firmly. "I teach kids to be themselves," he said. "That's not negotiable." The principal backed off. But David knew the scrutiny wasn't over. He and Michael talked late into the night, planning ways to protect their work, maybe a nonprofit, a way to formalize their community efforts. Eli's visits became the highlight of their months. He brought stories of Nashville, of protests and clinics and late-night debates with classmates. One weekend, he brought a friend, a law student named Aisha, who shared his fire. They spent hours in the garage studio, sketching and talking about justice. David watched, seeing Eli build a new kind of family, one rooted in the lessons of Willow Creek. The town continued to evolve. A local coffee shop started hosting open mic nights for queer youth. And Sam became a regular, his poetry raw and powerful. Mrs. Thompson's Neighborhood Watch grew into a formal organization, partnering with Michael's support group to offer resources for families. Even the church that had once petitioned against David began to soften, inviting Michael to speak at a community outreach event. One evening, David found an old sketch of Eli's, tucked in a drawer, a drawing of the courthouse from the trial. It's shadow-heavy. He showed it to Michael, and they sat in silence, remembering. "We got through it," Michael said, his voice soft. David nodded, his hand finding Michael's. Because of him. As spring approached, David and Michael planned a surprise for Eli's next visita new mural, this time on their garage, painted by the art club. It would feature Eli's sketches, a tribute to his courage. They worked in secret, Sam and Maya leading the charge, their brushes transforming the old wood into a story of love and resilience. David couldn't wait to see Eli's face when he saw it. Spring bloomed in Willow Creek, the air sweet with magnolias and possibility. David and Michael stood in the garage, the new mural hidden under a tarp, waiting for Eli's arrival. The art club had outdone themselves. Eli's sketches of their family, the town, and the courthouse wove together in a vibrant tapestry, a testament to their journey. Sam had added his own touch, a painted door half open, echoing his piece from the art show. Maya had written in small letters along the edge, "For Eli, who showed us how to fight." Eli's car pulled into the driveway, and David's heart raced with anticipation. He and Michael led him to the garage, their grins barely contained. "What's this?" Eli asked, his brow raised. When they pulled back the tarp, his jaw dropped. He traced the lines of his own sketches, now larger than life, his eyes shining. "You did this for me," he whispered. Sam stepped forward, shy but proud. "You showed me how to be brave," he said. Eli hugged him, then David and Michael, the four of them standing in the glow of the mural. The town had changed in Eli's absence. The coffee shop's open mic nights were now a staple, drawing crowds from neighboring towns. Mrs. Thompson's organization secured a grant to fund youth programs, and Michael's support group partnered with a regional network, amplifying their reach. Even Tom Grayson, once their loudest critic, donated to the mural fund, a quiet gesture that spoke volumes. David's teaching took on new life. The principal's scrutiny eased as the art program's success became undeniable. Students like Sam and Lucas filled the room with energy, their work reflecting their truths. David started a scholarship in Eli's name for kids in foster care who wanted to pursue art or law. The first recipient was a quiet girl who'd been inspired by Eli's story. Her application essay, a raw account of finding her voice through painting. Eli's visits were filled with plans. He talked about his legal clinic, now serving low-income families in Nashville. "We're helping a kid like Sam," he told David and Michael, his voice alive with purpose. "His parents won't accept him, but we're fighting for his rights." David saw the boy who'd stood in the courtroom, now a man shaping the world. Michael, ever practical, joked, "Just don't forget to sleep." "Okay." Eli laughed, but his eyes were serious, fixed on a future he was building. One summer evening, the town square hosted a pride event, the first in Willow Creek's history. The mural glowed under fairy lights, and music filled the air. Sam read a poem, his voice strong, while Maya led a workshop on street art. David and Michael stood together, watching their community imperfect, evolving come alive. Eli, home for the weekend, joined them, his sketchbook under his arm. "This is what we fought for," he said, and David nodded, his throat tight. The event wasn't without tension. A small group of protesters stood at the edge, their signs predictable, but they were outnumbered, their voices drowned out by laughter and song. Mrs. Thompson marched over, her face stern, and invited them to join the potluck. To everyone's surprise, one took a plate, sitting awkwardly among the crowd. It was a small step, but it felt like a victory. As the night wound down, Eli showed David and Michael his latest sketch, the Pride event, with their family at the center, surrounded by faces they knew and loved. "This is home," he said, echoing his earlier words. David looked at the drawing, then at his son, his husband, the town they'd fought to change. The trial had been a crucible, but it had forged something stronger: a family, a community, a legacy. Years later, Eli would graduate from Vanderbilt, top of his class, and join a legal aid organization, fighting for families like theirs. David and Michael would visit, their pride palpable as they watched him argue cases with the same fire he'd shown in the courtroom. Willow Creek would continue to grow, its mural a landmark, its pride event an annual tradition. Sam would become an artist, his work shown in galleries, always crediting Eli and David for his start. On quiet nights, David and Michael would sit on their porch, the mural on the garage glowing under the stars. They'd hold hands, remembering the night that had started it all: the siren, the cuffs, Eli's courage. They'd faced hate and fear, but they'd built something beautiful in its place. And in every sketch, every dinner, every new face at their table, they saw the truth Eli had spoken in that courtroom: love was worth fighting for, and it would always win.